What's going on, Headliner Nation? It's hard to believe. Week 15. For some of you, we've only got 2 weeks left in the fantasy football season. For any of you that go to week 17, we've got 3 weeks left. But at this point, all of you should know your playoff fates now. We're either a round in or you're beginning your first rounds this week, whatever type of format you may be playing in. So it's time to talk about the waiver wire a little bit. And as always, I'm Kyle, and I'm back here with our waiver wire video on Monday morning for the fantasy headliners. So let's jump into it. If you've got someone that you should be picking up or putting in a waiver wire bid for, whatever it may be, I've got a lot of options for you this week. It looks like we might have some injuries at the tight end position, already a very difficult position to try and work our way through. And we've got some other injuries as well, some people who aren't performing well. You're going to want to bolster your team a little bit this week. So let's go ahead and jump into it. But before we do, just a reminder that our 2021 Fantasy Football Draft Guide is currently on pre-order. That's right. If you head to the fantasyheadliners.com, you can pre-order our draft guide for the 2021 fantasy football season at a little bit of a discounted price right now. So if you're going to play some fantasy football next year, and you want as much help as possible, you want to win a fantasy football championship, that is a great option for you to invest in right now. So let's jump into our waiver wire picks. First and foremost, we're going to talk about the running backs. So let's dive into these running backs right now. Number one overall, not really number one overall. These guys aren't in any specific order because it depends on your team, your makeup, how much fab money you might have left, where you're on the waiver wire, things of that nature. So a lot of different things can change. So no particular order here. But the first one listed, Sony Michel from New England going up against Miami. Damian Harris left Thursday Night Football early last week with a back injury. Still no word on if he is going to end up playing this week. He does get, obviously, with it being on Thursday night, a little bit of extra time to heal back up. But for those of you that had Damian Harris, for those of you that are needing to stash somebody, Sony Michel will end up being the lead back on the ground and getting those touches on the ground if Harris ends up missing this game. So the question will be whether he will be back this week. Harris is substantially higher owned than what Michel is right now. So for you Harris owners, Michel is going to be somebody that you want to add just in case. Lynn Bowden from Miami going up against New England, only 0.1% owned. Last week, both Gaskin and Ahmed were out. Do one of them make it back this week? That's going to be a question about whether or not Lynn Bowden is worth anything to your team. Also, he's probably only going to be worth anything if you play in a PPR league. Even in a half PPR league, he's going to lose a ton of value. Didn't see a whole lot of touches on the ground, but he rocked in the passing game. He had 7 receptions on 9 targets. In a PPR league last week, Bowden put up a double-digit week for you. And again, that comes from those 7 receptions. Saw a lot in the passing game. Going up against New England, we'll probably see a little bit more work this week as well if Gaskin and Ahmed end up being out again. Trevion Williams for you Joe Mixon owners. Now, Joe Mixon appears, according to his IG, which some players, Josh Jacobs, try to trick us with their Instagram. With Joe Mixon, it looks like he's out of his boot and he's very close to returning. But Trevion Williams, it looks like has unseated Giovanni Bernard is kind of the supplemental back there right now. Will Gio kind of slip back into that role? If Mixon's back, it's possible. Will Williams see some more time? That's also possible. They may want to see what they have in Williams here at the end of the season and give him more touches. It is a tough matchup, but if you are a Joe Mixon owner, Gio's kind of been your backup option recently, right? He's been the guy that you've really been kind of relying on to be able to toss in there. And even though he hasn't given you any upside, he's at least offered you some points. He's been safe for you. For you Mixon owners, it is best if you go get Trevion Williams this week, though. If you're not able to get like a Sony Michel or even like a Lynn Bowden, the waiver wire for running backs this week is garbage. Okay, so just know that going into this. If you're having issues at the running back position right now, none of these guys are going to give you a whole lot of help. But for those of you that are still waiting on Mixon, if you own Mixon, Williams may end up being the guy to kind of help back him up and be that supplemental back moving forward. And if Mixon does miss another week, it's probably going to be Trevion Williams that gets a majority of the touches. Tony Pollard from Dallas going up against San Francisco, 7.4% owned. Now, here's the thing. If you own Ezekiel Elliott, then you should pick up Tony Pollard. If you don't own Ezekiel Elliott, I don't want you picking up Tony Pollard. Now, there's a lot of conversation going on right now, especially like out on Twitter. I see it. Tony Pollard is so much better than Zeke. Zeke's garbage. Zeke is no good. Tony Pollard should be the lead. Here's the thing. For those of you that are box score watching and saying that because of Tony Pollard's touches last week and his yardage, he's better than Zeke, you got to stop it. Okay, just knock it off right now. All right. Zeke was nursing an injury coming into the week. He was questionable all week. They went up big. So what'd they do? They gave Tony Pollard touches. They didn't need to run Zeke into the ground. If Zeke had gotten 20, 25 touches, he probably would have ran for about 100 yards. Maybe he would have scored a touchdown. The touchdown that Pollard scored is really the only difference between him and Zeke. Zeke had a better yards per carry. He had more yards. He had more touches in the passing game. So Tony Pollard, if you own Zeke, let's own Tony Pollard too, just in case. Maybe they go into this week and they say, man, Zeke is just, if he's running on a bum leg, if he's got an issue and he can't play, then Tony Pollard absolutely is going to be a start for us. But that's only if Zeke doesn't end up playing, okay? This is an emergency option, and like I said in my last waiver wire video, you want to own your handcuffs in the playoffs. You can't make trades. The waiver wire's thin. You need to guarantee that you have your guys' backup so you have someone to play if there is an injury. Last but not least for Houston, Buddy Howell at 0% owned going up against Indianapolis. Will David Johnson be back next week? He tested positive for COVID. Will he end up playing this week? If he actually did test positive, more than likely he will not be playing this week. But it looked like Howell kind of replaced Duke Johnson as the lead back last week on the ground. Now, Duke saw more touches through the air last week, but Buddy Howell did have more more yards and more carries on the ground. He went 11 for 42 last week. So again, if you're looking for an emergency option at running back, that's about as emergency as it gets. All right, moving on to wide receiver, and we don't have really anybody at running back this week, but we have got a ton of options at wide receiver. So let's go ahead and fly through these guys and really say these are the ones that we need to be concerned about the most. Again, in no particular order, but at the top, Gabriel Davis. And if you absolutely need somebody right now that can step in and play right away with no John Brown, it's Gabriel Davis. Touchdowns in 4 of his last 5 games. He's only 0.6% owned, and he's going up against Denver. More than likely, this guy is going to be available in your league. So I'm not naming a Manscaped must add this week because there's nobody that I'm really like, oh, we have to get him this week. There's nobody really like that here in week 15. So I'm not going to name anybody, but of the wide receivers, my number one addition would be Gabriel Davis. The dude's just been too good while John Brown has been sidelined with his injury. So TDs for the last 5 games, Gabriel Davis definitely my top option at the wide receiver position this week. James Washington, 1.1% owned, going up against Cincinnati. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why James Washington's all of a sudden scoring touchdowns. I mean, it's just making this position for Pittsburgh even worse for us to try and get through on a weekly basis. We already had Claypool, Johnson, and Juju Smith-Schuster that we were... Smith-Schuster? What was I getting ready to say? Oh, man. I got to go back to sleep for a little bit. But Juju Smith-Schuster, those 3 were already making it complicated enough, but they were throwing it enough. All of a sudden, Eric Ebron, he starts getting more targets. Now, he makes it complicated. Now, James Washington's out there. He's making it more complicated. So, he's not a guy I'm looking to add right now, but I still wanted to add him because if I didn't put him on here, I knew I was going to hear, hey, what about James Washington? He's got touchdowns back-to-back game, all that good stuff. I mean, he's making things more difficult for everybody. Unless you're in like a 16-team league, I'm not adding James Washington this week, but I wanted to make sure that I mentioned him at least. Keelan Cole, 13.4% owned, going up against Baltimore next week. He was a favorite of Minshew earlier in the season, and he made quite a many appearances on this waiver wire show to start the year. But Minshew, it looks like he's going to be back under center now, and if that happens, Keelan Cole was a favorite of his. Last week, 12 targets, 7 receptions, 67 yards, and that touchdown that he scored came after Minshew came back into the game. Kiki Cutie and Chad Hansen. Cutie is still under 17% owned. No Brandon Cooks this past week. So Kiki Cutie kind of stepped in as that number 1 option. I don't think he is a number 1 option. And you could tell by those numbers. Yeah, he did score that touchdown, but if he has to be the main focus, he's not really the guy. Chad Hansen, on the other hand, playing out of the slot a little bit, doing some different things, 14 targets the last 2 weeks. They are throwing the ball more than enough. Both of these guys, Kiki QT, no matter what, you can add, and he'll be fantasy viable. Chad Hansen, for me, you can add him and have him be okay, probably right around 10 points in half PPR leagues if Cook is out again. If Cooks does end up coming back for next week, Hansen probably not going to be that great of an option. Nelson Aguilar, 29.3% owned going up against the Chargers. Not sexy. Not sexy at all. Okay, but he keeps producing. He's clearly the wide receiver one in that offense, and he has 9+ targets in 3 of the last 4 matchups. You can slot this guy in as your wide receiver 3, and you'll get a decent performance every single time. Russell Gage, 7.6% owned, going up against Tampa Bay. Julio Jones, with no Julio last week, Gage had 5 receptions, 82 yards, and of course he threw that touchdown as well. A little trickery there. I wouldn't expect that on a weekly basis, but no Julio. Russell Gage continues to see a decent amount of volume. From Miami, Jakeem Grant and Mac Hollins. Devontae Parker, another injury. It seems like every single week we hear the same thing about Parker. He ends up leaving the field with an injury. So will he end up missing the New England game next week? Jakeem Grant and Mac Hollins, both guys that could step in, especially considering that Gesicki could end up being missing some time as well. And we'll talk about that more in the tight end segment. But Jakeem Grant, Mac Hollins, the 2 guys to kind of step in at that point. I would personally bet on Jakeem Grant before I bet on Mac Hollins, especially if I'm in a PPR league. So that's the route I would go if you're looking to replace Parker. Jalen Reagor, 10.2% owned, going up against Arizona. You guys keep giving me a bunch of crap. Why are you keeping Reagor on here? The offense looked much better last week. Reagor was the leading receiver. As Jalen Hurts settles into this role over the next few weeks, maybe we see more from the wide receivers. So again, as I've said in the past, when you own the wide receiver 1 for a team, you own potential for volume. And when you own potential for volume, if the matchup is good enough, you can put him in there. The good thing about Jalen Reagor, he's not going to see Patrick Peterson because he's just not going to sit on the outside and play. He's going to move all over. Patrick Peterson will more than likely see Alshon Jeffrey. So Jalen Reagor definitely could be a decent option this week if Jalen Hurts keeps up that performance from last week. And then MVS, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, the guy that continues to titillate us over the last couple of years. Big game. We add him. He does nothing afterwards. But, the wide receiver 2 is going to change on a weekly basis in Green Bay. We just never know who it's going to be. It could be MVS like it was last week. It could end up being Allen Lazard like it was a couple of weeks ago. It could end up being him next week. Robert Tonyan continues to be fantasy viable with another touchdown this past week. So MVS has the ability to go on a run and have some big plays and big targets, but here's the thing. Let's not mince any words here. The Detroit secondary sucked on Sunday. They couldn't stop anybody, and when you have the big playability that MVS has, it's no surprise to me that he had such a big game. It looks like we could have some issues at the tight end position this week. Mike Gesicki going down with an injury. Noah Fant going down with an injury. So you might be on the hunt for a tight end for your fantasy football matchup this week. Number 1, first and foremost, Miami. Let's cover them because of Mike Gesicki. Shaheen and Smythe, both 0% owned going up against New England. It's really a toss-up here. Either of these guys can end up hitting. Shaheen's going to be a little bit more of a red zone target, while Smythe looks like he might be more of the volume-dependent play. Neither of these guys I'm really banking on this week, though. But if you're in need of an emergency option, they are here. Dan Arnold. Okay. I've given the 1 or 2 Dan Arnold truthers that are out there a lot of crap this year, right? And it took you 13 weeks to finally be able to root for your boy and come back into the comments and try to tell me how wrong I was about Dan Arnold. Whatever. I'm still right about Dan Arnold. The dude scored a touchdown this past week. I had him as a sit. I was still right because he didn't even score 10 fantasy points. So that's what we're getting from Dan Arnold right now. Yeah, he's scoring, but outside of 1 week, he hasn't been fantasy viable all season long in terms of half PPR leagues. But I will go ahead and add him right now since he does have 4 touchdowns in the last 4 games. There's no volume, okay? Targets are 4 or less. Receptions are going to be 3 or 2. Okay, yards are going to be no more than probably 30. He has 1 game with more than 30 receiving yards. So, Dan Arnold, if you play him, good luck. Could he score a touchdown? Yeah. Part of it might be Kyler Murray's arm. He might not be able to push the ball down the field as well. Dan Arnold is making some decent plays down the field, okay? But it's his touchdown upside right now. He seems to have kind of unlocked a little bit in the red zone that's getting him open, and Murray's been looking his way and trusting him. So again, if you need an emergency option, you can play Dan Arnold and cross your fingers that he scores a touchdown. I'm going to continue to say Dan Arnold's not a thing, okay? You can overdraft him next year if you're a truther. Cole Kmet from Chicago, 0.3% owned, going up against Minnesota. 14 targets the last 2 weeks. Graham did score this past week, but Kmet is still seeing more volume than him. So even though Graham found the end zone this past week, Cole Kmet definitely a lot more volume right now than what Graham is seeing. Tony Fumagalli from Denver, going up against Buffalo. Noah Fant. Hurts my heart. Fumagalli is not... he went 5-4-53 after Fant went down last week. Will Fant end up being ready for Buffalo? I don't know. Okay, this is an emergency option. We're not adding Troy Fumagalli unless we absolutely have to. I'll bank on the next 2 guys. Irv Smith Jr., 0.9% owned, going up against Chicago. 4 receptions on 4 targets, 63 yards, and a touchdown last week with Kyle Rudolph injured. So if Kyle Rudolph is going to be out again, this is definitely a really, really good play and a really, really good addition. Outside of the other guy, Logan Thomas, who's next on the list, is the best option right now. 32% owned, so still available in quite a lot of leagues, and he's the tight end 5 since week 6. So he's definitely seeing more than enough volume, scoring, all of that to be a fantasy option for you. He's number 1. Logan Thomas, if you need to add someone at tight end, you add Logan Thomas. Number 2 is going to be Irv Smith Jr. So the tight ends really led the passing game last week. It was Irv Smith Jr. and then Tyler Conklin after that. Is that what we're going to see moving forward? I expected to see some of that at the beginning of the year. If you watched my videos at the start of the year, I had concerns about, number 1, does Justin Jefferson step in and become what Stephon Diggs was? Yes, he did. Would Adam Thielen be able to be a true wide receiver 1? Yeah, he has. They've been just fine together. But the other one was, and part of the reason I was concerned about those guys were the tight ends. I expected Irv Smith Jr. to be involved much more this season than what he was. Maybe it's coming to fruition a little bit, and we see that the rest of the way. So Irv Smith Jr., a good 1B option for you this week if Kyle Rudolph is out. But Logan Thomas, he's the number 1 addition at tight end right now if you're still looking for one. All right, the streaming portion of the video, let's jump into quarterbacks first. Number 1, Baker Mayfield, 21% owned. Gets the Giants next week. Now, this is recorded before Monday Night Football, so I can't tell you what Baker Mayfield did against the Ravens. He could have had a good game. He could have had an awful game. He could have an okay game. Whatever it may be, I don't care. He gets the New York Giants next week. The defense has been a lot better for it, but as better as that defense has been, the Cleveland offense has been much, much better. So you can stream Baker Mayfield next week with no issues. Jalen Hurts, he's kind of the number 1 streaming option right now after that game this past week. He added upside he looked good through the air, gave you a good floor through the air, but it was his 100 rushing yards on the ground that gave you a good upside. Okay, so Jalen Hurts going up against Arizona, a decent option for you next week if you need. Now, I'm not going to sit top fantasy options and get crazy to play Jalen Hurts. Don't do that, okay? But if you're dealing with issues right now and you need somebody with a little bit of upside, Jalen Hurts is going to be your guy this week. Mitchell Trubisky from Chicago, 7.1% owned, going up against Minnesota. He's the quarterback 9 since returning from his injury over the last 3 weeks. He's got 7 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. He's playing a lot better since coming back. Phillip Rivers from Indianapolis, 12.5% owned, going up against Houston. Right now, he has got a 10-2 touchdown to interception ratio since week 10. And yeah, for those math teachers out there, I could have broken it down, but who does that anymore? Whatever. And over the same time frame, he has 250 yards in all but one of those weeks since week 10. So he's been chucking the ball around a little bit, and he's been playing a lot better than he did to begin the season as well. So Phillip Rivers, another option for you this week with the way they've been throwing the ball. And this is a Houston defense that's just dealing with so many injuries right now that good time to take advantage of that matchup. On the defensive side of the ball, teams that are less than 50% owned that you could stream this week on defense, the Browns being number 1 against the New York Giants. Could be a big day for the Browns with the amount of pressure that they cause people. The Cardinals going up against Philadelphia, 28.3% owned. I just talked about Jalen Hurts being a good option. But again, what if Arizona sits down and they say, hey, this is the way we stop this guy, and Jalen Hurts comes crashing back down to earth next week? It's possible. A little bit risky, but they may have, now that they have more tape on Hurts, they may have an idea of what to plan for next week. Maybe New Orleans didn't. And then one of the best options this coming week, the Titans going up against Detroit. It's going to depend. Matthew Stafford coming out at the end of that game this past weekend. It looks like with a rib injury. Haven't heard anything else as of this recording, but if Stafford's going to be out and it's Chase Daniels at quarterback, the Titans going up against Detroit will be an excellent option. Well, there you have it, Headliner Nation. All of my waiver wire picks for week 15. Go ahead and get out there and start putting in those requests. Do me a favor, before you do that and leave the video, hit that like button if you appreciate the content. Leave a comment down below. Is there anybody that you didn't see that you have a question about potentially picking up? And as always, if you're new to the Fantasy Headliners, hit that subscribe button and become a part of Headliner Nation today. Appreciate everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in this video. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.